दादा ने कभी एक छोटा सा लोन लिया था और उसे चुकाने के लिए आप, आपके बच्चे और शायद उनके बच्चे भी अपनी पूरी जिंदगी एक तरह की गुलामी में बिता दें।
सुनने में ये किसी हिस्ट्री बुक की कहानी लगती है ना?
बिल्कुल। पर ये आज भी इसी मोमेंट भारत के कुछ हिस्सों की एक कड़वी सच्चाई है।
और आज हम भारत की इसी छुपे हुए सच की परतों को खोलने वाले हैं।
तो अगर आप इस तरह के डीप कॉन्वर्सेशंस में इंटरेस्टेड हैं तो जल्दी से सब्सक्राइब बटन दबा दें, लाइक करें और वो नोटिफिकेशन बेल को भी ऑन कर लें, बिकॉज यू डोंट वांट टू मिस दिस।
आज की हमारी चर्चा 2 हिस्सों में बंटी है।
ओके।
पहले हम डॉक्टर बी डी शर्मा के एक ऐतिहासिक पत्र को समझेंगे जो उन्होंने भारत के प्रेसिडेंट को लिखा था। इसमें उन्होंने बताया कि कैसे हमारे देश का जो डेवलपमेंट मॉडल है वो ही शेड्यूल कास्ट्स और शेड्यूल ट्राइब्स के लिए एक अन्यायपूर्ण सिस्टम बना रहा है।
और दूसरा हिस्सा,
फिर हम इस अन्याय के सबसे क्रूर रूप डेट बॉन्डेज या बंधुआ मजदूरी की गहराइयों में उतरेंगे। हम खास तौर पर कोलता जनजाति के केस स्टडी देखेंगे टू अंडरस्टैंड द ह्यूमन कॉस्ट। सो लेट्स अनपैक दिस।
चलिए शुरू करते हैं। टॉपिक नेम, लेटर ऑफ डॉक्टर बी डी शर्मा।
ब्रॉड माइक्रो थीम, द स्ट्रक्चरल इनजस्टिस इन मॉडर्न इंडियाज डेवलपमेंट मॉडल।
तो डॉक्टर शर्मा के पत्र का सबसे पहला और शायद सबसे फंडामेंटल आइडिया है द टू इंडियाज।
एग्जैक्टली, द टू इंडियाज, ऑर्गेनाइज्ड वर्सेस अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर।
इसे थोड़ा सिंपल वर्ड्स में डिफाइन करें तो
बेसिकली डॉक्टर शर्मा कह रहे हैं कि हमारे देश की इकोनॉमी 2 बिल्कुल अलग अलग हिस्सों में बट रही है। एक तरफ है मॉडर्न ऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर जहां अच्छी सैलरी है, जॉब सिक्योरिटी है, ग्रोथ है, सब कुछ है।
और दूसरी तरफ
है अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर जहां करोड़ों लोग बस गुजारे के लिए, डे टू डे सर्वाइवल के लिए संघर्ष कर रहे हैं।
इसको एक रियल लाइफ एग्जांपल से समझते हैं।
बिल्कुल। सोचिए एक सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियर जो बेंगलुरु में एक बड़ी एमएनसी में काम करती है, उसे फिक्स सैलरी मिलती है, हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस है, पेड लीव्स है, उसकी लाइफ प्रिडिक्टेबल है।
राइट, दैट्स द ऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर।
और दूसरी तरफ ओडिशा के एक दूर दराज गांव में एक किसान है, वो सिर्फ मॉनसून पर निर्भर है, कोई सोशल सिक्योरिटी नहीं, कोई फिक्स्ड इनकम नहीं, उसकी पूरी जिंदगी अनसर्टेनिटी से भरी है।
दोनों एक ही देश में हैं, पर उनकी दुनिया
कितनी अलग है। दैट्स द ड्यूअलिस्टिक सिस्टम इन अ नटशेल।
चलिए अब इस कॉन्सेप्ट पर थोड़ा और डीप में जाते हैं। इसका कॉन्टेक्स्ट क्या है? ये पत्र कब और क्यों लिखा गया था?
इसका कॉन्टेक्स्ट समझना बहुत जरूरी है। ये डॉक्टर बी डी शर्मा के 29th रिपोर्ट का हिस्सा है फॉर द इयर्स 1987-1989। वो उस समय कमिश्नर फॉर शेड्यूल कास्ट्स एंड शेड्यूल ट्राइब्स थे।
और उन्हें आईएएस नाम भी कहा जाता था, राइट? मतलब ही वाज नोन फॉर हिज प्रो पीपल वर्क।
प्रिसाइजली। तो ये जो डॉक्यूमेंट है ये कोई एकेडमिक पेपर नहीं है, ये एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल अथॉरिटी की फील्ड ऑब्जर्वेशंस पर बेस्ड है। सो इट्स अ वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट डॉक्यूमेंट।
और इसका बैकग्राउंड क्या था? उन्होंने ये ड्यूअलिज्म नोटिस क्यों किया?
उन्होंने ये महसूस किया कि आजादी के बाद जो विकास हुआ उसका फायदा समाज के ऊपरी तबके तक ही मतलब सिमट कर रह गया है। वो फायदा एससीज और एसटीज तक पहुंच ही नहीं रहा था, और इसकी वजह से अमीर और गरीब के बीच, ऑर्गेनाइज्ड और अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड के बीच एक बहुत बड़ा गैप, एक खाई बनती जा रही थी।
तो इस ड्यूअलिस्टिक सिस्टम का कोर लॉजिक क्या है? डॉक्टर शर्मा का मेन पॉइंट क्या था?
उनका मेन पॉइंट ये है कि ये जो मॉडर्न ऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर है ये एक द्वीप की तरह बन गया है, एक आइलैंड ऑफ प्रॉस्पेरिटी।
एन आइलैंड इन अ वास्ट ओशन ऑफ पॉवर्टी।
यस। अब इस आइलैंड में एससी एसटी कम्युनिटीज के लिए रिजर्वेशंस तो है, पर डॉक्टर शर्मा का आर्गुमेंट है कि ये सिर्फ एक बहुत स्मॉल सेगमेंट को ही बेनिफिट करता है।
अच्छा, तो ये नाकाफी क्यों है?
बिकॉज असली पार्टनरशिप तब होगी जब विकास का फायदा नेशनल लाइफ के हर सेगमेंट तक पहुंचेगा। अदरवाइज इट्स जस्ट, और मैं उनके वर्ड्स कोट कर रही हूँ, शेयरिंग नॉन जस्टिफाइड बेनिफिट्स ऑफ एन इनिक्विटस सिस्टम।
इनिक्विटस सिस्टम, ये एक बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग फ्रेज है। इसका मतलब है एन एक्सट्रीमली अनफेयर एंड अनजस्ट सिस्टम।
एग्जैक्टली। मतलब आप एक अन्यायपूर्ण व्यवस्था के नाजायज फायदों में एक छोटी सी हिस्सेदारी दे रहे हैं। ये जस्टिस नहीं है, ये तो बस अ टोकन जेस्चर है।
तो इसका रियल वर्ल्ड इंपैक्ट क्या होता है?
इसका असर ये होता है कि समाज में असमानता और ज्यादा गहरी हो जाती है। जो लोग पहले से ही मार्जिनलाइज्ड है वो और पीछे छूट जाते हैं। द गैप वाइडन्स। और जो लोग सबसे नीचे हैं उनकी नजर से देखे बिना जस्टिस का कोई मतलब ही नहीं है।
तो कंक्लूजन ये है कि द कोर आइडिया इज, जब तक हम जस्टिस को सबसे गरीब और वंचित व्यक्ति के नजरिए से नहीं देखते, तब तक हमारे सारे सेफगार्ड प्रोविजंस, ऑल आर कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल प्रोटेक्शंस आर एसेंशियली मीनिंगलेस। मतलब क्या हुआ?
सिंपल वर्ड्स में, एन इकोनॉमी विद 2 सेपरेट एंड मोर इंपॉर्टेंटली अनइक्वल पार्ट्स।
और डॉक्टर शर्मा के अनुसार रिजर्वेशंस इन सर्विसेज काफी क्यों नहीं है?
बिकॉज वो सिर्फ ऑर्गेनाइज्ड सेक्टर के एक बहुत छोटे हिस्से को टच करते हैं, जबकि मेजॉरिटी ऑफ द एससी एसटी पॉपुलेशन इस सेक्टर के बाहर ही रह जाती है।
राइट। एंड इनिक्विटस सिस्टम का क्या मतलब है?
एन एक्सट्रीमली अनफेयर एंड अनजस्ट सिस्टम, एक ऐसी व्यवस्था जो अपनी बनावट में ही भेदभावपूर्ण हो।
जस्टिस को लोएस्ट रंग ऑफ अ सोसाइटी के परसेप्शन से देखना क्यों जरूरी है?
क्योंकि असली अन्याय वही लोग महसूस करते हैं। अगर सिस्टम उनके लिए जस्ट नहीं है तो वो किसी के लिए भी ट्रूली जस्ट नहीं हो सकता। द सिस्टम्स जस्टिस इज टेस्टेड एट इट्स वीकेस्ट पॉइंट।
एंड माय फाइनल क्वेश्चन, क्या ये डुअलिज्म आज भी रेलेवेंट है?
एब्सोल्युटली, शायद पहले से भी ज्यादा। गिग इकोनॉमी और फॉर्मल जॉब्स का अंतर सोचिए। द नेचर ऑफ वर्क हैज चेंज्ड बट द फंडामेंटल डिवीजन, द ड्यूअलिज्म इज स्ट्रॉन्गर देन एवर।
दैट मेक्स सेंस। अब प्रैक्टिस के लिए दिस इज अ की सेंटेंस टू रिमेंबर।
Now pause and practice saying this aloud. Dr. B.D. Sharma argued that a dualistic economic system creates injustice because it benefits only a small segment of the organized sector.
Great. So a mini recap for this chunk.
In short, the report argues that India's economy is splitting into 2 unequal worlds, creating systemic injustice.
Okay, तो ये ड्यूअलिज्म का आइडिया क्लियर है, पर डॉक्टर शर्मा यहाँ रुके नहीं, राइट? उन्होंने इस एनालिसिस को और आगे बढ़ाया।
हाँ, बिल्कुल। अब हम आते हैं हमारे दूसरे चंक पर। क्लियर हेडिंग, इंडिया, भारत एंड हिंदुस्तानवा।
हिंदुस्तानवा, ये एक नया टर्म है।
Yes. डॉक्टर शर्मा कहते हैं कि ये डुअलिज्म अब और भी खतरनाक रूप ले रहा है। अब सिर्फ 2 नहीं बल्कि 3 भारत बन रहे हैं।
So what's the short definition of these 3 Indias?
सो पहला है इंडिया, ये मॉडर्न, ऑर्गेनाइज्ड, लग्जरी ड्रिवन पार्ट है।
The island of prosperity we just talked about.
एग्जैक्टली दूसरा है भारत, द ट्रेडिशनल अनऑर्गेनाइज्ड पार्ट, जहां लोग बस 2 स्क्वायर मील्स अ डे के लिए स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं।
Okay, India and Bharat. ये distinction तो हम सुनते रहते हैं. But what is Hindustan wa?
हिंदुस्तान इज द एब्सोल्यूट लोएस्ट ईयर, द डस्टबिन ऑफ डेवलपमेंट। ये वो जगह है जहां एससीज और एसटीज को बेसिकली धकेल दिया गया है।
Dustbin of development. That's a very powerful and disturbing image. इसे एक रियल लाइफ एग्जांपल से समझते हैं.
इमेजिन कीजिए अ लग्जरी मॉल इन अ बिग सिटी, दैट्स इंडिया।
Got it?
उसके ठीक बाहर एक सब्जी वाला जो सुबह से शाम तक मेहनत करता है, दैट्स भारत।
And Hindustan wa?
और उस शहर के आउटस्कर्ट्स में एक झुग्गी जहां के लोगों को साफ पानी भी नसीब नहीं, जहां डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स का सारा पोल्यूशन डंप किया जाता है, दैट्स हिंदुस्तान वा।
Wow. Let's get into the content discussion. ये 3-tier structure का idea. It's very powerful.
It is. It shows the sharpening polarization in our national economy.
इसका background क्या है? Where does this idea come from?
This idea comes from observing the high tide of so-called development.
So-called development.
Yes. एक तरफ इंडिया में लोग केयरफ्री हैं, लग्जरी गुड्स जमा कर रहे हैं। ऑन द अदर हैंड भारत में ऑर्डिनरी पीपल के लिए सवाल सिर्फ 2 वक्त की रोटी का है। द कॉन्ट्रास्ट इज स्टार्क।
तो इसका core logic क्या है? ये 3-tier system बनता कैसे है?
The letter argues that a process of centralization is snatching away resources from the common people and accumulating them at the top. Power and resources, दोनों।
And this creates not just 2 but 3 tiers.
एग्जैक्टली और जो लोएस्ट ईयर है हिंदुस्तान वा, वो डस्टबिन ऑफ डेवलपमेंट बन जाता है। ये कॉन्सेप्ट एक्चुअली फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड और थर्ड वर्ल्ड की थ्योरी से बोरोड है, जहां थर्ड वर्ल्ड को फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड का डस्टबिन कहा जाता था फॉर इट्स वेस्ट एंड पोल्यूटिंग इंडस्ट्रीज।
So Dr. Sharma is saying that this global dynamic is being replicated inside our own country.
प्रिसाइसली इसका रियल वर्ल्ड इम्पैक्ट ये है कि देश का एक बड़ा हिस्सा विकास की प्रक्रिया से पूरी तरह बाहर है, एंड वर्स वो उस विकास की कीमत चुका रहा है विदाउट गेटिंग एनी ऑफ इट्स बेनिफिट्स।
So the conclusion is that this is not just an economic issue.
Not at all. It's a violation of the fundamental intention of our constitution, which promises justice and equality for all.
Okay, let's do some cross questioning here. हिंदुस्तानवा शब्द का इस्तेमाल क्यों किया गया है? It's a very specific term.
It's used to signify the absolute lowest, most deprived stratum of Indian society, जहां लोगों को disposable, मतलब expendable माना जाता है। The term itself carries a sense of disdain.
And dustbin of development से क्या मतलब है?
इसका मतलब है कि डेवलपमेंट प्रोसेस का सारा नेगेटिव बाय प्रोडक्ट, सारा कचरा, डिस्प्लेसमेंट, पोल्यूशन, लॉस ऑफ लाइवलीहुड, सब इस लोएस्ट ईयर पर डंप कर दिया जाता है।
क्या ये वेस्टर्न डेवलपमेंट मॉडल की क्रिटिक है?
यस, वेरी मच सो। डॉक्टर शर्मा साफ कहते हैं कि डेवलपमेंट फर्स्ट, सोशल इक्विटी सेकंड का मॉडल अपनाने की जल्दी में हमने ये गलती की है। वी ब्लाइंडली कॉपीड अ मॉडल दैट वाज नॉट सूटेड फॉर आवर रियलिटी।
सेंट्रलाइजेशन ऑफ इकोनॉमी का क्या रोल है इसमें?
सेंट्रलाइजेशन मींस पावर एंड रिसोर्सेज कुछ हाथों में कॉन्सेंट्रेट हो जाते हैं जो आम आदमी से छीन लिए जाते हैं, बीट फॉरेस्ट, मिनरल्स और लैंड। दिस इज द इंजन ऑफ दैट 3-tier सिस्टम।
और एससीज और एसटीज इस लोएस्ट ईयर में क्यों हैं?
क्योंकि हिस्टोरिकल इनजस्टिस जैसे कास्ट सिस्टम और करंट डेवलपमेंट पॉलिसीज दोनों ने मिलकर उन्हें सबसे ज्यादा वल्नरेबल, सबसे असहाय बना दिया है।
Right, okay. Let's get a practice cue for this.
Practice saying the 3 tiers of India, Bharat and Hindustanva show a sharp polarization where the lowest tier becomes the dustbin of development.
And the mini recap?
In short, India isn't just splitting into 2 but 3 tiers, with the lowest tier bearing the entire cost of unequal development.
Okay, so first a dualistic system and then a 3-tier system. This was a process of worsening inequality. But एक community इतनी lowest tier में पहुंचती कैसे है?
Excellent question. And that brings us to our third and perhaps the most insightful chunk from the letter.
Which is?
Heading, The Anatomy of Deprivation, a 5-step process.
The anatomy, so it's a breakdown of the process.
Yes. डॉक्टर शर्मा कहते हैं कि डेप्रिवेशन कोई सिंगल इवेंट नहीं है, ये एक प्रोसेस है, अ स्लो पॉइजन जिसके 5 स्टेजेस है। It shows how a community is slowly and systematically made completely helpless.
Let's start with a real life example to frame this.
Imagine कीजिए एक ट्राइबल कम्युनिटी जो सदियों से एक जंगल में रहती आई है।
Okay.
फर्स्ट, सरकार आकर कहती है कि ये जंगल पर तुम्हारा कोई अधिकार नहीं है, ये स्टेट प्रॉपर्टी है। दिस इज स्टेज 1।
Right.
फिर
वहां माइनिंग शुरू होती है तो उन्हें उनके ही जंगल में मजदूर बना दिया जाता है. That's stage 2.
ओके, उन्हें मजदूरी भी पूरी नहीं मिलती, उनका एक्सप्लॉयटेशन होता है। दिस इज स्टेज 3।
I see the progression.
धीरे धीरे वो कर्ज में डूबकर बॉन्डेड लेबर बन जाते हैं, अपनी आजादी खो देते हैं। दैट्स स्टेज 4।
And finally,
फाइनली वो ये मानने लगते हैं कि यही उनकी किस्मत है, कि वो इसी लायक है। That's the final and most tragic stage, stage 5.
wow. Let's dive into this content discussion. This is one of the most insightful parts of the letter.
It is. It explains the psychological and structural process of how people are rendered powerless.
इसका background क्या है? ये discussion कहाँ से शुरू होती है?
The discussion starts from the denial of the right to life guaranteed by our constitution. And the Supreme Court has repeatedly said right to life is not just about breathing.
Right. It means the right to live with human dignity.
Exactly. And this 5-step process shows how that dignity is systematically stripped away.
So let's break down the core logic. What are these 5 levels formally?
Okay, level 1. Non-recognition of rights over resources. State आके कहता है तुम्हारी जमीन, तुम्हारा जंगल, तुम्हारा है ही नहीं. Their entire economic base is destroyed in one go.
Okay, step 1.
Level 2. Alienation of the worker from the means of production. अब तुम मालिक नहीं, मजदूर हो. You no longer own the forest or the land, you just sell your labor.
From an owner to a wage earner.
Level 3. Denial of due entitlement of labor. अब आप wage earner तो बन गए, पर तुम्हें तुम्हारी मेहनत का सही फल भी नहीं मिलेगा. You will be exploited.
Which naturally leads to debt.
Exactly. Which brings us to level 4. Bartering of personal liberty. आजादी बेचकर कर्ज चुकाना या बस जिंदा रहना. This is the stage of bonded labor of modern slavery.
And level 5, the psychological one.
Yes, level 5 psychological state of accepting deprivation as justified. ये सबसे खतरनाक स्टेज है जहां इंसान हार मान लेता है और अन्याय को अपनी नियति, अपनी डेस्टिनी समझ लेता है.
That's chilling. What's the real world impact of this process?
The impact is total. ये प्रोसेस ट्राइबल कम्युनिटीज को कंप्लीटली हेल्पलेस बना देता है. उनकी डिग्निटी, उनकी सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट, देयर कल्चर, देयर आइडेंटिटी सब छीन लिया जाता है.
The letter also mentions the system criminalizes them.
Yes, the system even criminalizes them for their traditional lifestyle. जैसे जंगल में अपने पारंपरिक तीर धनुष लेकर चलना.
आपको एक potential criminal बना देता है.
Exactly. Or brewing their traditional brew after worshipping their gods becomes an offense under excise laws. Their entire way of life is declared illegal.
So the conclusion is that this is not just poverty.
This is a systematic process of dehumanization. And the real irony, as the letter points out, is that this process, which started under the British, has continued and in fact intensified after independence.
Okay, let's do some cross questioning. पांचवा स्टेज, the psychological one, सबसे ज्यादा खतरनाक क्यों है?
Because when people start believing their oppression is justified, they stop fighting back. It's the ultimate victory for the oppressor. It makes the chains invisible.
Criminalization of their social and economic system का एक और example दे सकते हैं.
The letter mentions shifting cultivation, or jhoom, which was their traditional agricultural practice. Modern forestry laws often brand this as destructive and illegal without providing a viable alternative.
Okay.
And the right to life in the Constitution, what does it really mean?
It means more than just breathing.
The Supreme Court has interpreted it to mean the right to live with human dignity, which includes the right to a livelihood, clean environment, and shelter.
ये deprivation process British period में शुरू हुआ था.
Yes, but the letter makes a very painful observation. It states it became still more stronger after independence. That's the real tragedy.
इस process को reverse कैसे किया जा सकता है? Is there a way out?
The letter suggests that we must reverse the process. Start by correcting the first step, by recognizing their rights over resources. Give them back their forests and their land. That's the foundation for everything else.
Makes sense. Let's have the practice cue.
Practice saying the 5 levels: non-recognition of rights, alienation from production, denial of entitlement, bartering liberty, and psychological acceptance.
And a quick mini recap.
In short, deprivation is a systematic 5-step process that strips communities of their resources, labor, liberty, and finally, their will to resist.
Okay, this is getting very intense. So we have the theory, the framework of this injustice, but Dr. Sharma must have given specific examples, right? Where is this battle actually being fought?
Yes, he does. And that's our next chunk, heading the battlegrounds: land, forest, and livelihood.
So this is the ground zero of injustice.
You can call it that. डॉक्टर शर्मा ने कुछ स्पेसिफिक एरियाज को हाईलाइट किया है जहां ये अन्याय सबसे साफ, सबसे नेकेडली दिखता है. एंड दीज आर लैंड राइट्स, फॉरेस्ट राइट्स एंड डिस्प्लेसमेंट.
Can you give us a real life example of such a battleground?
Of course. The letter itself mentions Sonbhadra in UP, जहां इंडस्ट्रियल कॉम्प्लेक्सेस के नाम पर ट्राइबल लैंड्स को सिस्टमैटिकली लूटा गया है.
I've heard of that.
और थिंक ऑफ द नर्मदा वैली, जहां डेवलपमेंट, बड़े डैम्स के नाम पर लाखों लोगों को डिस्प्लेस किया गया. These are real, long drawn out battles.
Right. So let's get into the content discussion. We are moving from theory to practice now.
Exactly. Now we are looking at the practical examples given in the letter.
What's the background here? What is the core conflict?
The core conflict, as the letter suggests, is often between the constitutional right to life and the legal right to property. And in this conflict, the right to property, especially of powerful interests, almost always wins.
Okay, so let's break down the core logic. What are the key battlegrounds mentioned?
The first one is rights over means of production, specifically land. SC/STs की लैंड पोजीशन हिस्टोरिकली बहुत वीक है और लॉज इतने कॉम्प्लिकेटेड हैं कि आउटसाइडर्स, मनी लेंडर्स, कॉर्पोरेशंस आसानी से उनकी जमीन हड़प लेते हैं.
And Sonbhadra is an example of this?
Yes, the letter mentions the case of Sonbhadra as an example of a state of near lawlessness, जहां laws were openly flouted to dispossess tribals.
What's the second battleground?
Second is entitlement of the tiller. Land to the tiller is a celebrated principle in India. जो जमीन जोते, जमीन उसकी होनी चाहिए.
But the reality is different.
The reality is very different. The letter gives examples from Bihar, Soul Daltaganj, or Andhra Pradesh, Pulimamadi, to show that people who've been cultivating a piece of land for generations don't have their names in the records. So legally, they have no claim.
The third battleground must be forests.
Absolutely. Right over resources, forests. The symbiotic, or the life-giving relationship between tribals and forests was completely ignored by the state.
Oh.
The Indian Forest Act, a colonial-era law, made forests state property overnight. This led to mass eviction, destruction of natural forests for commercial monoculture plantations like tea, coffee, or teak, not to mention mining and industry.
And the fourth battleground?
It's the other side of the same coin, displacement. The letter specifically targets the Land Acquisition Act, a 19th century colonial law.
Why?
Because this law is used to displace people for public purpose, which is a very vague term. The letter argues this law is unconstitutional because it violates their fundamental right to life.
So what's the real-world impact of all this?
The impact is devastating. In all these cases, the people who have lived in harmony with nature for centuries are suddenly branded as illegal and encroachers on their own land.
And the tragic conclusion is?
That the legal framework itself becomes a tool for oppression, working directly against the spirit of the Constitution that it's supposed to uphold.
Okay, time for some cross-questioning. Land to the tiller का principle क्या है? In simple terms.
It's the simple just idea that the person who actually cultivates the land should be its owner, not some absentee landlord who lives in a city.
The Land Acquisition Act को अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल क्यों कहा गया है?
Because it treats land as a simple commodity that can be bought and sold. It completely ignores the citizen's right to life and livelihood, which is tied to that land. It places the state's power above the citizen's fundamental rights, which violates the spirit of our constitution.
फॉरेस्ट्स को स्टेट प्रॉपर्टी बनाने का सबसे बड़ा नेगेटिव इंपैक्ट क्या हुआ?
It broke the lifelong symbiotic relationship. The forest was their home, their pantry, their pharmacy, their temple. It turned them into strangers and trespassers in their own home. It was a cultural death blow.
सोनभद्र केस क्या दिखाता है? What does it exemplify?
It shows a complete breakdown of the legal and administrative system where even court decisions fail to protect tribal lands from being looted in the name of settlement and development. It's an example of state-sponsored lawlessness.
इन सब मामलों में कॉमन थ्रेड क्या है?
The common thread is the state failing in its constitutional duty to protect the most vulnerable. And instead of protecting them, the state machinery often sides with powerful vested interests.
Okay, let's have the practice cue.
Practicing. The key conflict areas are rights over land, forests, and displacement, where colonial-era laws often clash with the constitutional right to life.
And a quick mini recap to sum up part 1.
In short, the letter exposes how legal systems for land, forests, and development are weaponized against the very people they should protect.
Okay, that was an incredibly detailed look at Dr. Sharma's letter. It sets the stage perfectly for the second part of our discussion.
Yes, now we move from the systematic overview to its most brutal manifestation.
Topic name.
Debt bondage and bonded tribes.
And the broad micro theme.
The vicious cycle of debt and generational servitude.
So our first chunk in this section is to simply understand the concept. Clear heading. What is debt bondage?
Yes, first the definition. डेट बॉन्डेज एक ऐसा सिस्टम है जहां एक व्यक्ति लोन चुकाने के लिए अपनी या अपने परिवार की मजदूरी या सर्विसेज को क्रेडिटर के पास गिरवी रख देता है.
Okay, that sounds like a contract. What's the catch?
The catch is that the wages are very low or sometimes zero, and the interest rates are impossibly high, so the loan never gets paid off.
And the bondage continues.
It can last for generations. समझे? It's basically slavery disguised as a loan agreement.
Let's use a real life example to make this clearer.
Imagine a tribal farmer whose crop fails. He needs money for his daughter's wedding. So he takes a small loan, say a few thousand rupees, from a local moneylender.
Okay.
In return, he agrees to work in the moneylender's field until the loan is paid off.
But
But the interest is so high and the wage credited to his account is so low that after a year, the debt has actually increased. Soon his son also starts working there to help his father.
and the trap is set.
That is a classic debt bondage trap.
So let's get into the content discussion. We are now exploring this issue deeply.
Yes. Dr. Sharma's letter mentions bonded labor as a universal phenomenon among tribals. We are now digging into why that is.
What's the background? Why are tribals so vulnerable to this?
The roots of this problem are very, very deep. The source lists several reasons. Let's look at them.
Okay.
The core logic can be broken down into a few categories. First, economic reasons. Uneconomic holdings, matlab bahut choti zameen, poor soil, primitive cultivation techniques, no irrigation. Their agriculture is a gamble.
So they are always on the edge of a crisis.
Exactly. Second, lack of alternatives. There are no other jobs available in their area. And more importantly, no formal credit facilities. No banks will give them a loan.
So the money lender is the only option.
The only option. Third, social and cultural reasons. They often borrow for what economists call unproductive purposes.
What does that mean?
Things like ceremonies, festivals, marriages, and death feasts. These are incredibly important for their social life and status, but they don't generate any income to repay the loan.
And the fourth reason is quite tragic.
Yes, cultural values. Their own honesty and truthfulness are exploited. They feel a strong cultural obligation to repay debts no matter how unjust the terms are. They believe a debt must be honored.
So what's the real world impact of this system?
The impact is that it gives unlimited, almost absolute power to moneylenders and landlords. Illiteracy means the tribals can't even check the account books, which are often manipulated.
And it becomes generational.
Yes, the relationship can last for generations, with the debt being inherited by the male heir. It's a complete trap.
So the conclusion is that debt bondage isn't just an economic transaction.
Not at all. It's a structural problem born from a toxic mix of poverty, lack of options, social pressure, and cultural exploitation.
Right. Let's do some cross-questioning. Unproductive purposes का क्या मतलब है?
From a purely economic viewpoint, money spent on a festival or a wedding doesn't generate income, so it's called unproductive. But for the community, these are essential social obligations that hold the society together.
Honesty जैसी positive value शोषण का कारण कैसे बन सकती है?
Because money lenders exploit this value. A tribal person feels morally bound to repay a debt his grandfather took, even if the interest rates are ridiculously high. They won't disown the debt, and the moneylender knows this.
ये bondage generations तक कैसे चलती है?
The principal amount is small, but the interest compounds. The debtor gets only food and maybe a tiny amount of money, so the debt never decreases. It is then passed on to the son upon the father's death.
क्या ये सिर्फ tribals के साथ होता है?
While it's most prevalent among tribals and Dalits due to historical factors of landlessness and social oppression, it can happen to any extremely poor and marginalized person who has no access to formal credit.
And finally, इसे slavery क्यों कहा जा रहा है? What's the justification for using such a strong word?
Because the person loses their freedom of choice. They can't work for anyone else, they can't move freely in search of better work, and they get little to no wages. Their personhood is controlled by another. That is the very definition of slavery.
Understood? Let's have the practice cue.
Practice saying, debt bondage is a system where a debtor pledges their labor to a creditor, but the loan is structured in a way that it can never be repaid, leading to generational servitude.
And the mini recap?
In short, debt bondage traps tribals through a mix of economic hardship, social pressures, and the exploitation of their cultural values like honesty.
Okay, so we've understood the theory of debt bondage. Now to understand its real horror, we have a specific case study.
Yes, this is a very powerful and disturbing part of our source material. Clear heading: the Kolta of Uttarakhand, bonded forever.
Who are the Kultas? Can we give a short definition?
The Koltas are a tribal community in the Jaunsar Babar region of Uttarakhand. They represent one of the worst historical cases of bonded labor in India, trapped in a system of economic, social, and caste-based oppression for centuries.
And a real-life example of their situation.
By local custom, which was called the Dasturul Amal, a Kolta person was forbidden from owning land. Can you imagine?
No land. So, complete dependence?
Complete dependence on high caste landlords, mainly Brahmins and Rajputs, for everything. They would take small loans at insane interest rates, around 25 to 60%, and then they and their children would work for the landlord for life.
That's horrifying. Let's dive into the content discussion of this case study.
To understand the reality of bondage, we need to zoom into this specific case of the Kolta tribe as documented in the source.
So, what's the background here? The social structure.
The Koltas are at the absolute lowest rung of a very rigid local caste hierarchy. They were considered untouchable. The economy was primitive and non-monetized. This combination made them extremely vulnerable.
So, what was the core logic? How did this system of exploitation actually work? Let's break it down.
The system had four main pillars. The first was landlessness. The Dasturul Amal, which was a local code of conduct, legally prohibited them from owning land. This was the foundation of their servitude.
Pillar 2 must be the loans.
Yes, usurious loans. Interest rates were, as I said, 25 to 60% per annum. Plus, there was a 6.25% commission called Gant Khulai.
Gant Khulai, what does that mean?
That's where money is kept. It was a commission deducted from the loan amount right at the beginning. So if you took a loan of 100 rupees, you only got about 94, but you paid interest on the full 100.
That is institutionalized cheating from the very start.
The third pillar was illiteracy and deception. Since most Kolta were illiterate, moneylenders could manipulate the account books however they wanted. Most transactions were oral, with the Kolta's thumb impression sealing their fate for generations.
And the fourth pillar?
Panchayat complicity. The village panchayat, the body meant to deliver justice, was dominated by the same high caste Rajputs who were the landlords. So instead of helping the Kolta, they would often fine them on some pretext, pushing them even further into debt to the same landlords.
It's a completely closed loop, a perfect trap with no exit.
Exactly. Now let's talk about the real world impact, the consequences of this system. It wasn't just financial. The consequences were horrific.
What were they?
Obvious ones were the loss of personal freedom and land alienation. But the most horrifying consequence was the conversion of their wives, sisters, and daughters into prostitutes to pay off the debt.
What?
Yes. When all else failed, the women of the family were trafficked to the brothers of Delhi, Meerut, and other cities. This also led to a devastating spread of venereal diseases in the community.
This is beyond economic exploitation.
The conclusion is that the bondage of the Kolka was a complete system of servitude that destroyed them economically, socially, and physically. It was a dehumanizing machine.
Let's do some cross-questioning, though it's hard to even process this.
Ji.
Dasturul Amal kya tha?
It was a traditional local code or set of rules that, among other things, forbid the Koltas from owning land, cementing their dependence on landlords for their very survival.
And Gant Khulai kya hai?
It's a commission deducted from the loan amount right at the beginning, a clever way to cheat the debtor before the loan period even starts. It's pure deception.
Panchayat, जो justice के लिए होती है, वो exploit कैसे कर रही थी?
Because the panchayat was controlled by the same upper caste landlords who were the moneylenders. It was a classic conflict of interest. They were the judge, jury, and the exploiters, all in one.
The prostitution angle, how did that come in?
It was the ultimate form of exploitation. When the debtor had nothing left to give, no labor, no assets, they were forced to sell the women of their family to end the debt. It was the final, most brutal form of repayment.
So this sounds like it's about caste as much as it is about economics.
Right.
Exactly. You cannot separate the two here. The economic exploitation was built on a foundation of caste hierarchy and the concept of untouchability. Caste gave the moral and social sanction for this economic brutality.
Okay, let's get the practice cue.
Practice saying, the Kolta tribe's bondage was a result of a system involving landlessness due to Dasturul Amal, usurious loans with Gant Khulai, and social oppression by the dominant castes.
And the mini recap for this horrific story.
In short, the Kolta case study reveals how debt bondage is a multi-layered trap of economic exploitation, caste hierarchy, and horrific social abuse.
So after hearing about the Kolta, the obvious question is, did anything change? The system was so entrenched. Was there any intervention? Yes, there was. A major one. And that brings us to our final chunk. Heading, the Kolta today. Change and stagnation.
So, a law to break the chains. But did they actually break?
That's the million-dollar question. So the short definition is this. In 1976, the government passed the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act.
A landmark law.
Absolutely. The book then revisits the Kolta community 25 years later to see how much has actually changed on the ground. And the answer is mixed. कुछ सुधार हुए हैं, पर कई बड़ी समस्याएं वैसी की वैसी हैं.
Can you give a real-life example of this mixed reality?
Sure. A Kolta youth today might not be a bonded laborer in the traditional sense. He might have gone to school and even have a government job. That's a huge, revolutionary change.
That's the positive side.
However, his sister might still be vulnerable to being trafficked to a city brothel due to the family's extreme poverty. That's the stagnation. The old vulnerabilities persist in new forms.
Let's get into the content discussion. A law was passed. What happened next?
The author conducted a follow-up study, which is what we're discussing now. First, let's understand the background. The 1976 Act.
What did it do?
The Act officially abolished bonded labor, made forcing someone into it a punishable offense, and, very importantly, recently set up vigilance committees at the district level for implementation. It also started a rehabilitation scheme for freed laborers.
Sounds comprehensive on paper.
Yes.
So let's look at the core logic. What has changed? The positives.
There are three main areas of positive change. First, economic changes. With new roads and markets opening up the region, employment avenues have increased. Wages are higher now. They are no longer solely dependent on the landlords.
Second,
Social changes. School enrollment has increased significantly, though the dropout rate is still high. The everyday intimidation by the upper caste Rajputs is less prevalent now.
and third, the most important one.
Political changes. This is perhaps the biggest success. Koltas are now participating in panchayats and even state assembly elections. They are politically conscious. They are no longer, in the author's words, deaf and dumb driven cattle. They have found their voice.
Okay, that's the good news. Now for the bad news. What hasn't changed? The negatives.
The biggest negative is the trafficking of women. This is one horrific aspect of their life that has not changed. Economic vulnerability continues to push Kolta and Bajgi women into prostitution in cities like Delhi and Meerut.
The root cause was never addressed.
Exactly. Second, landlessness. The land-based rehabilitation has not been very effective. The plots given were too small or of poor quality. Landlessness is still rampant.
And the third negative?
Bureaucratic apathy. The initial enthusiasm of NGOs and civil society in the 80s has faded in the face of a sluggish, indifferent, and often corrupt bureaucracy. The system is just not interested in implementing the law in its true spirit.
So what's the final conclusion from this follow-up study?
The conclusion is that the Bonded Labor Act of 1976 was a critical, essential first step. But just making a law is not a magic wand. Without strong political will and honest implementation, the chains of exploitation, though changed in form, remain. As the book says, the laws become damp squibs.
Damn squibs. I like that phrase. Okay, let's do some cross-questioning. तो एक्ट का सबसे बड़ा पॉजिटिव इम्पैक्ट क्या हुआ?
The increase in political consciousness and participation. The Koltas finding their political voice was the most revolutionary change.
ट्रैफिकिंग ऑफ women क्यों कंटिन्यू हो रहा है?
Because the root cause, extreme economic vulnerability and deep-seated poverty, has not been fully addressed. For some families, it remains the only desperate option to survive. The demand from the cities also fuels this trade.
डैम स्क्विब्स का क्या मतलब है?
It's an idiom. It means something that was expected to be impressive or effective turns out to be a complete failure, like a firecracker that fizzes but doesn't explode.
क्या बॉन्डेड लेबर अब मॉडर्न रूप ले चुका है? Has it just changed form?
Yes. The source suggests that intergenerational bondage tied to agriculture is less common now. Instead, new forms of bondage exist in community production for global markets, like in brick kilns, stone quarries, or garment workshops. The chains are still there, they just look different.
तो प्रॉब्लम लॉ में है या इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में?
The book strongly suggests the problem is bureaucratic apathy and a lack of political will in implementation. The laws are mostly good, but they're not enforced with the vigor and honesty required.
Understood. Let's get the practice cue for this final chunk.
Practicing, despite the Bonded Labor Abolition Act of 1976, change for the Kolta has been mixed. While political participation has increased, deep-rooted issues like landlessness and trafficking of women persist.
And the mini recap.
In short, the law provided new hope, but on-ground reality for the Kolta shows that legal changes without sincere implementation and addressing root causes are not enough.
All right, that was a very deep and, I must say, an intense discussion. Let's quickly recap what we've learned today.
We covered two broad themes.
Yes.
Broad micro theme 1, we saw the structural injustice in modern India's development model through Dr. B.D. Sharma's powerful letter.
And broad micro theme 2, we zoomed into the vicious cycle of debt and generational servitude by studying the concept of debt bondage and the tragic case of the Kolta tribe.
Let's summarize with some key takeaways from Dr. Sharma's letter. Okay. First, India's economy has a dualistic system that benefits a few and leaves the majority behind, creating a three-tiered society of India, Bharat, and Hindustanva.
Second,
There's a serious dissonance between British-era laws and the Indian constitution spirit, which often harms tribals instead of protecting them.
and third,
Deprivation is a five-step process that systematically strips communities of their rights, resources, and dignity, especially in the battlegrounds of land and forests.
and the takeaways from the debt bondage section.
First, debt bondage is a trap of economic, social, and cultural factors that leads to generational slavery, a modern form of slavery.
Okay,
Second, the Kolta tribe case study shows in brutal detail how caste oppression and economic exploitation work together to create a horrific system of bondage.
and the final, most sobering takeaway.
Laws like the 1976 Abolition Act are crucial but insufficient without honest implementation and the political will to bring real structural change.
Now it's time to process all this. Here are 6 quick questions to think about.
Soch lijiye.
1. Can you explain the difference between Bharat and Hindustanva in your own words? 2. What are the 5 levels of deprivations that Dr. Sharma talks about?
3. Why is the Land Acquisition Act called a colonial law with a colonial mindset?
4. What is Gaant Khulai and how was it used to exploit the Kolta tribe?
5. Why did the trafficking of Kolta women continue even after the 1976 Act?
And 6. In your opinion, why do laws against social evils often become damp squibs in India?
And here's a simple challenge for you all. Try to explain the core argument of Dr. B.D. Sharma's letter to a friend or family member in under 2 minutes. See if you can make them understand the concept of the dualistic system.
So today's discussion wasn't just academic, it's a reflection of our society. It forces us to ask a tough question. What does development truly mean if it leaves so many people behind?
What stood out to you the most? Doctor's sharp analysis or the heartbreaking story of the Kolta? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one.
And the final provocative thought we want to leave everyone with is this.
The sources talked about laws and systems, but change also happens at a human level. What is the role of the organized sector, people like us who are part of India, in breaking these cycles of injustice? Is awareness enough?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. If this conversation made you think, make sure you subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Until next time, stay curious.